The distant echo of a baby's wailing cut through the stillness of the Montana night, a sound as forlorn as the howling wind that swept across the plains. Ruben Thorne stood beside the handcrafted pine cradle, his broad shoulders slumped in defeat as he gently bounced his 3-month-old daughter in his arms. His weathered face, usually stoic and unreadable after years on the frontier, now betrayed every ounce of his desperation. The baby's cries had not stopped for hours, and the dark circles under Ruben's eyes told the story of many sleepless nights before this one. It was 1885, and the unforgiving Montana Territory had claimed another victim, his wife Margaret, who had passed away from childbed fever just weeks after bringing little Sarah into the world. Their remote ranch, 20 miles from the nearest town of Cottonwood Springs, had become a prison of grief and helplessness. "SHH, little one," Ruben whispered, his voice cracking with exhaustion. "Your pa's trying his best." He placed a calloused finger against her tiny palm, feeling her instinctively grasp it. The connection brought tears to his eyes. "I know you want your mama. I want her too." The cabin was modest but sturdy, built by Ruben's own hands 3 years prior, when he and Margaret had claimed this piece of land with dreams of building a cattle empire. Now, dirty dishes cluttered every surface, laundry lay in piles, and the hearth fire was dangerously low. The single oil lamp cast long shadows across the room, illuminating the chaos that had become his life. Sarah's wails intensified, her tiny face reddening with the effort. Ruben had tried everything the sugar-teat Margaret had shown him how to prepare: warm cloths on her belly for the colic, gentle rocking, walking, singing. Nothing worked. He was a man who could break wild horses, drive cattle across dangerous terrain, and fight off bandits, but he couldn't soothe his own child. "I'm failing you both," he whispered, looking at the wedding portrait on the mantel. Margaret's kind eyes seemed to watch him, a reminder of all he had lost. A knock at the door startled him. Visitors were rare this far out, especially after nightfall. Instinctively, Ruben reached for the rifle propped against the wall while keeping Sarah cradled in his other arm. The knocking came again, more insistent. "Who's there?" He called out, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Mr. Thorne, it's Willow Pierce from town. Doc Murphy sent me." Ruben hesitated, then shifted Sarah to rest against his shoulder while he unbolted the door. The woman who stood on his porch was not what he expected. She was young, perhaps 25, with honey-brown hair tucked beneath a simple bonnet and intelligent green eyes that widened as she took in his disheveled appearance. She wore a practical traveling dress and carried a small leather satchel. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her eyes moving from his face to the crying infant in his arms. "The doctor received your message about your daughter. He's tending to a difficult birth in Helena but sent me in his place. I'm his nurse." Before Ruben could respond, Sarah let out another piercing wail. Willow's expression softened immediately, and she stepped forward without waiting for an invitation. "Let me help," she said simply, holding out her arms. Something in her confident manner broke through Ruben's pride. After a moment's hesitation, he surrendered his precious daughter to this stranger's care. Willow took Sarah with practiced ease, cradling her against her chest while her fingers gently explored the baby's body. "How long has she been crying?" Willow asked, moving toward the hearth for better light. "Hours today. Days, really, ever since." He couldn't finish the sentence. Willow nodded, understanding. "When did she last nurse? What have you been feeding her?" Ruben explained about the goat's milk from their small herd, the sugar water, how he'd been struggling to get Sarah to take enough. As he spoke, Willow unwrapped the baby's swaddling and continued her examination. "She's hungry but also uncomfortable," Willow said. "Her little belly is hard as a rock, gas pains. She looked around the cabin, taking in the state of things. Do you have any fennel or catnip? Peppermint? Ruben shook his head helplessly. Margaret had an herb garden, but I don't know what's what. It's probably all withered now anyway. Willow nodded, reaching into her satchel. I brought some things just in case. She produced a small tin and opened it, revealing dried herbs. I'll make a tea. It will help her digestion and soothe her colic. As she worked, Ruben watched in amazement. Willow moved efficiently around his kitchen, finding a pot to boil water, sterilizing one of the baby's feeding bottles, all while holding Sarah against her shoulder and patting her back in a steady rhythm. The baby's cries began to soften to whimpers. How are you doing that? Ruben asked, his voice filled with wonder. Willow smiled. Babies respond to confidence, Mr. Thorne. They know when we're uncertain or afraid. She tested the temperature of the herbal mixture on her wrist before transferring a small amount to the feeding bottle. This is weak enough for her age. Just a few drops to start. Sarah accepted the bottle eagerly, her cries finally ceasing as she sucked on the rubber nipple. The sudden silence in the cabin was almost shocking. Ruben felt his legs go weak, and he sank into a chair at the table. Thank you, he whispered, watching as his daughter's eyes began to droop with the first peace she'd known in days. You're welcome, Willow replied softly. But this is temporary relief. She needs proper care, a regular feeding schedule, and… She glanced around the cabin again, a cleaner environment. Babies are susceptible to all manner of illness. Ruben felt shame wash over him. I've been trying, Miss Pierce. I truly have. I know, she said, her voice gentler now. No one expects a man to know these things, especially alone. She hesitated, then continued. I could stay a few days, show you how to care for her properly, get things organized. Hope and wariness battled within him. Don't you have duties in town? Patients who need you. Doc Murphy gave me leave to help. He was quite concerned when he received your message. Said he'd delivered this little one and promised your wife he'd look after her health. Willow's eyes met his directly. I can sleep in the barn if that's more proper. No, Ruben said quickly. There's a small room off the kitchen. It was meant to be a nursery someday, but… He swallowed hard. It has a cot. You're welcome to it. As Sarah finally drifted to sleep in Willow's arms, Ruben felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of tension he'd been carrying for weeks. Watching this capable woman holding his daughter, he realized how desperately he needed help. Pride had kept him struggling alone, but Sarah deserved better. I'll accept your help, Miss Pierce, he said formally. For my daughter's sake. Willow nodded, a small smile touching her lips. For Sarah's sake, she agreed, looking down at the now peaceful baby. And please call me Willow. Dawn broke over the eastern plains, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Ruben awoke with a start, realizing he'd slept through the night for the first time in months. He bolted upright, panic seizing him at the silence, no baby cries. He rushed from his bedroom to the main room of the cabin, only to stop short at the scene before him. Willow sat in the rocking chair near the hearth, which now glowed with a fresh fire. Sarah was nestled against her chest, contentedly sucking on a bottle. The kitchen table had been cleared of its clutter, dishes washed and stacked neatly on the shelf. Even the floor had been swept. Good morning, Willow said softly, looking up at him with a smile. We've been up for a little while. Ruben ran a hand through his disheveled hair, acutely aware of his rumpled appearance. You should have woken me. You needed rest as much as she did, Willow replied. A father who can barely stand isn't much use to his child. There was no judgment in her tone, just practical wisdom that Ruben couldn't argue with. He moved to put coffee on the stove, grateful to find it already prepared, the pot warm. You've been busy, he said, pouring himself a cup. Early riser, Willow explained. Always have been. My father ran the general store in Helena before we moved to Cottonwood Springs. Opening hours wait for no one, he always said. Ruben took a sip of the coffee, stronger and better than the weak brew he'd been making. What brought you to nursing? Not many women choose that path. A shadow crossed Willow's face. The war. I was just a girl, but I helped with the wounded who were sent to recover in Montana Territory. Later, when Doc Murphy came through Helena looking for an assistant, I already had experience. She smiled down at Sarah. And I've always loved children. She seems to love you too, Ruben observed, watching his daughter's content expression. Babies are simple creatures at heart. They need food, comfort, cleanliness, and love. Willow shifted Sarah to her shoulder, patting her back gently. Once you establish a routine, you'll find it easier. Ruben wasn't convinced, but he nodded anyway. What's your plan for today? First, to show you how to properly prepare her milk and the herbal remedies for her colic, Willow said decisively. Then we need to wash her linens and clothes. I noticed your garden out back. If you're agreeable, I'd like to see what herbs might be salvageable. Having them fresh would be better than dried. Whatever you think best, Ruben agreed, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders at having someone else make decisions. I need to check the cattle and horses this morning, mend some fencing. Would you be all right with her for a few hours? Of course, Willow said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to care for a stranger's child. We'll be just fine, won't we, little one? She smiled at Sarah, who chose that moment to let out a tiny burp. The sound of Willow's gentle laughter followed Ruben as he headed out to tend to his ranch duties, a sound so unexpected in his grief-stricken home that it nearly brought him to tears. The days fell into a pattern. Each morning, Ruben would wake to find Willow already up, tending to Sarah and preparing breakfast. He would do his ranch work while Willow cared for Sarah and gradually brought order to the chaos of the cabin. In the evenings, they would share simple meals, and Willow would demonstrate baby care techniques: how to swaddle properly, how to check for rashes, how to bathe the tiny, squirming infant without terror of dropping her. On the third day, Ruben returned from repairing a broken fence to find Willow in Margaret's abandoned garden, a broad-brimmed hat protecting her from the summer sun as she carefully weeded around struggling plants. "It's not as bad as I feared," she called when she spotted him. "The perennials are hardy. Mint, thyme, sage, they've survived despite neglect. With some care, they'll thrive again." Ruben approached, noticing Sarah sleeping peacefully in a basket placed in the shade of a scrubby pine. "Just like her," he said quietly, nodding toward his daughter. "Surviving despite my neglect." Willow stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "That's not fair to yourself, Mr. Thorne." "Ruben," he corrected her. After all, she'd been living in his home for days now. "Ruben," she acknowledged with a nod. "You were grieving and overwhelmed. There's no shame in that. Where I come from, a man takes care of his responsibilities," he said stiffly. "And where I come from, people help each other through hard times," Willow countered, her green eyes flashing with intensity. "No one makes it alone out here. That's why we have communities, churches, neighbors." "We're 20 miles from the nearest neighbor," Ruben pointed out. "Which was a choice, wasn't it?" Her directness caught him off guard. "You and your wife chose this isolation. Now circumstances have changed. Maybe your choices need to change too." The words stung because they contained truth. He and Margaret had been fiercely independent, determined to build their dream far from the interference of others. But that dream had included both of them, working as a team. Before Ruben could respond, Sarah began to stir in her basket. Willow immediately moved to check on her, lifting the baby with that same natural ease that continued to amaze him. "She's wet," Willow announced. "Would you like to change her? You need the practice." Ruben hesitated, then nodded, accepting the challenge. As he followed Willow back to the cabin, he found himself studying her profile, the determined set of her jaw, the gentle curve of her neck, the wisp of honey-brown hair that had escaped her bonnet. For the first time since Margaret's death, he felt something other than grief stir within him, and the realization brought a fresh wave of guilt. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains, Sarah finally asleep inside, Ruben cleared his throat awkwardly. "You've been here almost a week," he began. "I imagine Doc Murphy will be expecting you back soon." Willow turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "Are you asking me to leave, Ruben?" "No," he said quickly. "That's not," he sighed, struggling to find the right words. "I'm grateful for your help, more than I can express, but I can't keep you from your life, your duties. I sent word to the doctor yesterday with Mr. Jensen when he passed by on his way to town," Willow said. "Asked for another week if you'll have me. Sarah is doing better, but I'd feel better staying a bit longer." Relief flooded Ruben, followed immediately by concern. "Won't people talk? A single woman staying at a widower's ranch," Willow laughed softly. "People always talk, Ruben, but Doc Murphy's reputation protects mine. Everyone knows I'm here in a nursing capacity." She paused, then added more softly, "Unless you're concerned for your reputation." "I couldn't care less what anyone thinks of me," he said honestly. "I just don't want to cause you any trouble." "The only trouble would be leaving when I'm still needed," she replied simply. The next week passed even more quickly than the first. Sarah's colic improved dramatically with Willow's herbal remedies and feeding schedule. The cabin transformed curtains that had been packed away now hung at windows, floors gleamed from scrubbing, and the scent of baked bread replaced the stale odor of neglect. Even Margaret's garden showed signs of revival under Willow's careful attention. More surprising to Ruben was his own transformation. The crushing weight of grief hadn't disappeared, but it had shifted, becoming more bearable. He found himself smiling at Sarah's attempts to coo, laughing at Willow's stories about the colorful characters of Cottonwood Springs, and looking forward to their evenings together on the porch. One afternoon, Ruben returned from town with supplies to find Willow at the washtub, sleeves rolled up as she scrubbed laundry. Sarah was nearby in her basket, batting at a small cloth toy Willow had fashioned from scraps. "Let me help with that," Ruben said, setting down his packages and rolling up his own sleeves. Willow looked up in surprise. "This is women's work." "Not out here," Ruben replied, taking a wet shirt and wringing it out with his strong hands. "Out here, work is just work, and everyone does what needs doing." A smile spread across Willow's face. "Your wife must have been a fortunate woman." The mention of Margaret no longer brought immediate pain. Instead, Ruben found himself able to smile at the memory. "She'd laugh to hear you say that. Always said I was too stubborn by half." "That I can believe," Willow teased, splashing a bit of water in his direction. Before he could stop himself, Ruben flicked water back at her, and suddenly they were laughing like children, splashing each other until they were both damp and breathless. When they finally stopped, Ruben found himself standing closer to Willow than he'd intended, close enough to see droplets of water clinging to her eyelashes, to notice the sprinkle of freckles across her nose that the sun had brought out. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Sarah gurgled happily, breaking the spell between them. Willow stepped back, a flush rising to her cheeks as she turned her attention back to the laundry. "I should hang these to dry before the sun gets low," she said, her voice slightly unsteady. Ruben nodded, aware that something had shifted between them, something that both frightened and exhilarated him. That night, after Sarah had been put to bed, Ruben found Willow sitting at the kitchen table, writing in a small journal by lamplight. Letters. He asked, pouring himself a cup of the herbal tea she'd introduced to his household. Notes, mostly, she replied, closing the book. Observations about Sarah's progress, recipes for the remedies that seemed to work best for her. "For when you leave," Ruben said, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. Willow nodded, not meeting his eyes. "I can't stay forever, Ruben." "Why not?" The question surprised them both. Ruben hadn't meant to ask it aloud, but now that he had, he couldn't take it back. Willow looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Because this isn't my home. I have responsibilities in town, patients who need me." "And what about us?" Ruben asked quietly. "We need you too." The words hung between them, loaded with meaning neither was ready to fully acknowledge. "Ruben," Willow began carefully, "you're still grieving your wife. Sarah needs stability, not confusion." "I'll always love Margaret," Ruben said honestly. "She was my wife, Sarah's mother. Nothing changes that." He reached across the table, his fingers stopping just short of touching Willow's. "But I've learned these past 2 weeks that the heart doesn't just shrink after loss. It can grow again, make room for new feelings." Willow withdrew her hand, standing abruptly. "I think it's best if I return to town tomorrow," she said, her voice strained. "Sarah is doing well now. You've learned what you need to care for her properly." "Willow, please." Ruben stood as well, but she was already moving toward the small room off the kitchen where she slept. "Good night, Mr. Thorne," she said formally, closing the door behind her with quiet finality. Ruben stood in the kitchen, the rejection washing over him in waves. He'd spoken too soon, pushed too hard. The ease and comfort they'd developed had made him forget himself, forget the proper way of things. Willow was right, he was still a grieving widower, and she was a respectable woman who had come only to help with his child, not to be courted by a man whose wife was barely cold in her grave. The next morning was painfully awkward. Willow packed her few belongings while Ruben saddled his horse to take her back to town. They spoke little, exchanging only necessary words about Sarah's care. The baby, sensing the tension, was fussier than usual, clinging to Willow when she tried to hand her to Ruben. "She'll settle once I'm gone," Willow assured him, gently extracting herself from the baby's grip. "Children are resilient. She'll adjust." Ruben wondered if Willow was talking about Sarah or herself. He wondered if he would adjust as easily. The ride to Cottonwood Springs was long and mostly silent. Willow sat behind him on the horse, her hands lightly holding his waist for balance, each point of contact a reminder of what he was losing. As they approached the outskirts of town, she finally spoke. "I've left detailed instructions on the kitchen table. Recipes, feeding schedules, everything you need to know. If Sarah's colic returns, the dried herbs in the tin should last a month at least." "Thank you," Ruben said stiffly, unable to bring himself to say more. Cottonwood Springs was a small but growing town, with a main street lined by false-fronted buildings, a general store, saloon, blacksmith, and at the far end, the doctor's office and adjacent small house where Willow had a room. As they approached, Doc Murphy himself came out onto the porch, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and a perpetually worried expression. "Willow, we've missed you," he called, then nodded at Ruben. "Mr. Thorne, how's that little one doing?" "Much better, thanks to Miss Pierce," Ruben replied formally as he helped Willow down from the horse. "She's the best nurse in the territory," Doc Murphy said proudly. "Got a natural way with the little ones especially." He peered at Ruben more closely. "You're looking better yourself." Less like a man half in the grave. Ruben managed a tight smile. "Your nurse worked miracles for us both." Willow blushed, busying herself with her satchel. "I should unpack and freshen up, doctor. Then I'll be ready to review any cases that need attention." "No rush," Doc Murphy said easily. Been quiet here. Take the afternoon to rest. He turned to Ruben. Won't you stay for dinner, Mr. Thorne? Least we can do after Willow spent 2 weeks helping you out. Before Ruben could decline, a commotion from down the street caught their attention. A rider was galloping into town, his horse lathered and heaving. He pulled up sharply in front of the doctor's office. "Doc," the man shouted, nearly falling from his saddle. "It's the Henderson baby burning up with fever. Mrs. Henderson, too. The whole family's sick." Doc Murphy's expression darkened instantly. "Fever, you say? Any rash, coughing?" "Red spots all over little Tommy," the man confirmed. "Started with the older kids 3 days ago. Now everyone's got it." "Measles," Doc Murphy and Willow said simultaneously, exchanging concerned looks. "I'll get my bag," the doctor said grimly. "Willow, I'll gather supplies." She was already moving toward the storage shed behind the office. "Willow, bark for the fever, honey for the cough, calamine for the rash." Ruben stood frozen, a new fear gripping him. "Measles, is it?" "Could Sarah catch it?" Doc Murphy turned to him with grave eyes. "It's highly contagious, especially for infants. The Henderson place is only 5 miles from your ranch. I'd advise you to return home immediately and stay there. No visitors, no trips to town until this passes." "How long?" Ruben asked, already moving back to his horse. "A month at least," the doctor replied. "Once it starts spreading, there's little to do but wait it out and treat the symptoms." Ruben swung up onto his horse, his mind racing with this new threat to his daughter. He looked down at Willow, who had returned with an armload of supplies. "Good luck," he said inadequately. "Stay safe." Her eyes met his, full of concern. "Keep Sarah isolated, boil all her things. If she shows any signs, fever, cough, runny eyes, make the bark tea I showed you." He nodded, committing her words to memory. With a final look at her worried face, he turned his horse and galloped out of town, fear giving him speed. For the next 3 weeks, Ruben lived in constant dread, checking Sarah obsessively for any sign of illness. He boiled everything that touched her, kept the cabin meticulously clean using the methods Willow had taught him, and barely slept for worry. But as days passed with no symptoms appearing, he began to hope they had escaped the contagion. The ranch felt emptier than ever without Willow's presence. Sarah seemed to miss her too, often looking around the room as if searching for the woman who had cared for her so tenderly. The routines Willow had established helped, but Ruben found himself talking to her in his mind, asking what she would do when Sarah was fussy or wouldn't take her bottle. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Sarah sleeping against his chest, he heard the distant sound of hoofbeats. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped beside his chair, but as the rider came into view, he recognized the side saddle and the slender figure of Willow Pierce. She approached cautiously, stopping her horse at a distance. "Stay there," she called. "Don't come any closer." Ruben stood, his heart racing at the sight of her. "Willow, what are you doing here?" "The quarantine is still in effect," she confirmed, dismounting but remaining several yards away. "I've been exposed, Ruben. I've been caring for the sick. I can't come any nearer to Sarah." "Are you ill?" he asked, studying her face anxiously even from a distance. She shook her head. "No, I had measles as a child. I'm immune, but I could still carry it on my clothing, my hair." She looked exhausted, her usually neat appearance disheveled from hard riding. "I came to warn you. It's spreading. 3 families in the valley now. One of them lost their youngest only 4 months old." Ruben tightened his hold on Sarah protectively. "How bad is it in town?" "Bad," Willow admitted. "The Hendersons lost their mother yesterday. The father and 3 children are still fighting it." She pushed a stray lock of hair from her face. "Doc Murphy sent me to warn the outlying ranches, tell everyone to stay isolated." "You shouldn't be traveling alone," Ruben said, frowning. It's not safe. A tired smile touched Willow's lips. I can handle myself, Ruben. My father taught me to shoot before I could read. Still, he insisted, you look exhausted. At least rest here before you continue. I can make up a place for you in the barn, away from the house. Willow hesitated, then nodded. Just for a few hours. I have 3 more farms to reach before nightfall tomorrow. Ruben carried Sarah inside, placing her in her cradle before returning to prepare a space in the small barn. He filled a washtub with hot water, left clean towels and a bar of soap, and set out bread, cheese, and cold meat from his pantry. He was placing a final blanket on the makeshift bed when Willow entered the barn, leading her horse. "This is too much trouble," she protested when she saw his preparations. "Least I could do," Ruben replied, maintaining a safe distance. "After all you did for us." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with unspoken words and regrets. "How is Sarah?" Willow finally asked. "Good," Ruben said, unable to keep a note of pride from his voice. "Growing every day, sleeping better. I've kept up with everything you taught me." "I'm glad," Willow said softly. "And you, how are you managing, one day at a time?" he answered honestly. "Some days are harder than others." Willow nodded, her eyes showing understanding. "I should have written," she said suddenly. "After I left, to check on you both. I'm sorry I didn't." "You've been busy saving lives," Ruben said. "No need to apologize for that." "It wasn't just that," Willow admitted, her gaze dropping to the ground. "I was confused about what happened between us, or what almost happened." Ruben's heart skipped a beat. "I spoke out of turn that night, put you in an uncomfortable position. I'm the one who should apologize." "Did you mean it?" Willow asked, looking up at him directly. "What you said about your heart growing to make room for new feelings?" "Yes," Ruben said simply. "I meant every word." Willow took a small step toward him, then stopped, remembering the need for distance. "I've thought about you both every day," she confessed. "Worried about you. Missed you." The admission hung in the air between them, as tangible as the dust motes floating in the shafts of sunlight through the barn boards. Ruben wanted nothing more than to cross the space between them, to hold her, to show her what words couldn't express. But Sarah's safety had to come first. "When this is over," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "when the quarantine is lifted, would you consider coming back?" "Not as a nurse this time." Willow's eyes widened. "What are you asking, Ruben?" "I'm asking for a chance," he said. "A chance to court you properly, with time and respect, to see if what started between us might grow into something more." A slow smile spread across Willow's face, lighting her tired eyes. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." They stood looking at each other across the barn, unable to touch but connected all the same by something powerful and new. Finally, Ruben reluctantly backed toward the door. "You should rest," he said. "I'll check on Sarah and come back later with hot coffee." "Thank you," Willow said. As Ruben turned to leave, she added, "Ruben, I'm glad I came today, even if it was with bad news." "So am I," he replied, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks despite the dangers that still threatened them. True to her word, Willow left after only a few hours of rest, continuing her mission to warn the isolated homesteads about the measles outbreak. Before she rode away, she and Ruben stood at a safe distance, making plans for when the epidemic had passed. "It could be a month or more," Willow warned. "These things take time to burn themselves out." "I'll wait," Ruben promised, "however long it takes." The weeks that followed were among the hardest of Ruben's life. News reached him through occasional passing riders that the measles continued to spread, claiming more victims, especially among the very young and the elderly. He lived in constant fear for Sarah, checking her for symptoms multiple times a day, but she remained healthy, growing stronger as summer gave way to early fall. Letters began to arrive from Willow, delivered by the traveling minister who had taken to making rounds of the isolated homesteads, bringing news and spiritual comfort to those affected by the epidemic. Her letters were a lifeline for Ruben, detailed accounts of the situation in town, medical advice for keeping Sarah healthy, and increasingly personal reflections on her hopes for when they could see each other again. Ruben wrote back, his unpracticed hand cramping as he filled pages with updates about Sarah's development, ranch life, and his growing feelings for Willow. He found himself revealing thoughts he'd never spoken aloud, his fears about raising a daughter alone, his dreams for the future, even funny anecdotes about his daily mishaps that he knew would make her smile. By mid-October, the first frost had touched the plains, and with it came news that the measles epidemic was finally waning. No new cases had been reported in 2 weeks, and Doc Murphy had declared that quarantine measures could be relaxed for those who had shown no symptoms. Ruben immediately rode into town, leaving Sarah in the care of Mrs. Jensen, his nearest neighbor whose family had already weathered the illness. Cottonwood Springs appeared subdued, with black crepe hanging from several doorways marking houses that had lost family members. The toll had been heavy, 17 dead, including 5 children. He found Willow at the doctor's office, assisting an elderly man with a bandaged hand. When she looked up and saw Ruben standing in the doorway, her professional composure momentarily faltered, a brilliant smile breaking across her tired face before she collected herself. "Mr. Thorne," she said formally, finishing the bandaging, "what brings you to town today?" "Heard the quarantine was lifted," Ruben replied, removing his hat. "Thought I'd check on things personally." Doc Murphy emerged from the back room, his face lighting with recognition. "Thorne, good to see you made it through unscathed. How's that little girl of yours?" "Thriving, Doc, thanks to your nurse's good teaching." Ruben's eyes never left Willow's face as he spoke. Doc Murphy glanced between them, a knowing look crossing his weathered features. "Willow, why don't you take your break now? You've been working since dawn." "But the inventory," Willow began to protest. "Can wait," the doctor said firmly. "Go on, get some fresh air. That's doctor's orders." Willow blushed but nodded, removing her apron and reaching for her shawl. Ruben held the door for her as they stepped out onto the boardwalk. They walked in silence to the small town park, a humble square with a few benches and young trees planted by the Ladies' Improvement Society. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and fallen leaves. "You look well," Willow said when they were seated side by side on a bench. "Sarah, too, growing like a weed," Ruben confirmed. "Starting to try to roll over makes changing her quite an adventure." Willow laughed, the sound warming Ruben more than the autumn sunshine. "I've missed her," she admitted. "Missed you both." "We've missed you too," Ruben said, then corrected himself. "I've missed you, Willow. Your letters kept me going these past weeks." She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "I wasn't sure if I was being too forward, writing so often." "Not often enough," Ruben said, gathering his courage. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something." Willow looked surprised as she accepted it. "What's this?" "Open it," Ruben encouraged. She carefully unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden carving of a cradle, exquisitely detailed despite its tiny size. "You made this?" she asked, running her finger over the smooth surface. Ruben nodded. "Had a lot of evening hours to fill while Sarah was sleeping." "It's a reminder of how we met, how you walked in and changed everything." Willow's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked up at him. "It's beautiful, Ruben. Thank you." "There's something else," he said, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure she must hear it. "Something I want to ask you. Before he could continue, a shout from down the street interrupted them. They both looked up to see a young boy running toward them. "Miss Pierce, Doc needs you right away. Mrs. Collins' time has come and the baby's turned wrong." Willow was on her feet immediately, her duty overriding all else. "I have to go," she said apologetically to Ruben. "Mrs. Collins has had difficult births before. This could take hours." Ruben stood as well, disappointment warring with understanding. "Go," he said. "What you need to ask will wait." Willow hesitated, then impulsively stood on tiptoe and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Come back tomorrow," she whispered before turning to follow the boy at a run. Ruben watched her go, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been, a smile spreading across his face despite the interrupted moment. He would come back tomorrow and the next day if necessary. Some things were worth waiting for. The next day, Ruben arrived at the doctor's office to find it closed. A note pinned to the door explaining that Doc Murphy and Nurse Pierce had been called to an emergency at a ranch 10 miles south and wouldn't return until evening. Disappointed but undeterred, Ruben decided to use the time to finish the errands he'd been postponing, purchasing winter supplies, ordering lumber for repairs to the barn roof, arranging for a wagon load of hay to be delivered. By late afternoon, as he was loading his purchases onto his wagon, he spotted Doc Murphy's buggy returning to town, Willow seated beside the elderly doctor. They both looked exhausted, but Willow's face brightened when she saw Ruben waiting by the doctor's office. Doc Murphy pulled the buggy to a stop, giving Ruben a weary nod. "Been waiting long?" he asked. "Just finished my business in town," Ruben replied, moving to help Willow down from the high seat. Her hand was warm in his as she stepped down, and she didn't immediately pull away. "I'm sorry about yesterday," she said quietly. "Mrs. Collins had a difficult time, but mother and baby are both well now." "That's what matters," Ruben assured her. "I know your work is important." Doc Murphy cleared his throat. "Willow, why don't you take the rest of the day? I can manage the evening rounds myself." "Are you sure, doctor?" Willow asked, concern evident in her voice. "You must be tired too." "Not as young as I once was, but not in my grave yet either," the old doctor said with a chuckle. "Go on. Mr. Thorne here looks like he has something important on his mind." Ruben felt his face warm at the doctor's perceptiveness, but didn't deny it. Willow hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Let me change first," she said. "I'll just be a moment." While Willow went inside to freshen up, Doc Murphy fixed Ruben with a penetrating look. "She's special, that one," he said. "Best nurse I've ever worked with. Kind heart, steady hands, sharp mind." "I know," Ruben said simply. "She deserves happiness," the doctor continued. "Lost her parents young, worked hard all her life. Never complains, always puts others first." "I understand what you're saying, Doc," Ruben said, meeting the older man's gaze directly. "My intentions are honorable." Doc Murphy studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what he saw. "Good. That's all I needed to hear." When Willow emerged wearing a fresh dress, her hair neatly pinned beneath a simple bonnet, Ruben thought she had never looked more beautiful. He offered his arm, which she took with a shy smile. "Where would you like to go?" he asked as they walked away from the doctor's office. "Somewhere quiet," Willow suggested. "It's been a long 2 days." Ruben led her to the small church at the edge of town. The building was empty at this hour, its doors unlocked as was the custom in small frontier communities. The late afternoon sun streamed through the simple stained glass windows, casting colored light across the wooden pews. They sat side by side in the last row, the peaceful silence enveloping them. Ruben took Willow's hand in his, studying the contrast, her smaller, softer fingers against his sun-darkened, calloused palm. "Yesterday," he began, Before we were interrupted, I was about to ask you something." Willow turned slightly to face him, her eyes catching the colored light from the windows. "I remember," she said softly. Ruben took a deep breath. "These past months have taught me how precious life is, how quickly it can change. When Margaret died, I thought my heart died with her. I couldn't imagine ever feeling joy again." He squeezed Willow's hand gently. "Then you walked into my home and said those simple words, 'Let me help.' And you did help, Willow. You helped Sarah thrive. You helped me learn to be a father. But more than that, you helped me find hope again, a reason to look forward to each new day." Tears gathered in Willow's eyes, but she remained silent, letting him continue. "I know it hasn't been long," Ruben acknowledged. "Some might say it's too soon. But out here, life doesn't wait for proper timing. We grab happiness when we can find it." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small silver ring with a single pearl. "This was my mother's. I'd be honored if you'd wear it as my wife." A tear slipped down Willow's cheek as she looked at the ring. "Ruben," she whispered, "are you certain? You have Sarah to consider." "Sarah loves you already," Ruben said, "and I—" He paused, gathering his courage. "I love you, Willow Pierce. I think I started falling in love with you the moment you took my crying daughter from my arms and brought peace to my home." Willow's free hand came up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his beard-roughened cheek. "I love you too," she admitted. "I tried not to. Told myself it was too soon, that you were still grieving, but my heart wouldn't listen." "Is that a yes?" Ruben asked, hope rising in his chest. Willow nodded, her smile radiant through her tears. "Yes, Ruben Thorne, I will marry you." Ruben slid the ring onto her finger, then drew her into his arms for their first real kiss, tender and sweet, full of promise and hope for the future. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Ruben rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. "Soon," Willow replied with a smile. "I don't want a long engagement. Winter's coming and Sarah needs a mother before the snow flies." "Next week," Ruben suggested, only half joking. Willow laughed. "Give me a month to prepare, to arrange things with Doc Murphy. First Sunday in November." "I'll be counting the days," Ruben promised. The wedding was simple but joyful, held in the same small church where Ruben had proposed. The entire town turned out to see their nurse marry the quiet rancher from beyond the ridge. Sarah, dressed in a new white gown sewn by the ladies of the church, was passed from arm to arm, cooed over and admired by everyone. Doc Murphy gave the bride away, his weathered face beaming with pride. Willow wore a dress of pale blue, with Margaret's pearl ring on her finger and wildflowers in her hair. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ruben kissed his new bride with such tenderness that several of the town matrons dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The community provided a wedding feast at the hotel dining room, and as dusk fell, Ruben and Willow prepared to depart for the ranch, now their home together. As they said their goodbyes, Doc Murphy pulled Ruben aside. "I've been thinking," the elderly doctor said. "Town's growing. Need for medical care is growing with it. Been considering taking on a partner, someone younger to eventually take over my practice." Ruben listened, uncertain where this was heading. "That new doctor from Denver I've been corresponding with, he's interested. If he comes, Willow would be free to focus on midwifery, which is her real gift anyway." The doctor glanced at Willow, who was accepting congratulations from the townswomen. She could still attend births, help with the women's ailments, but she'd be based at your ranch, not in town. Understanding dawned on Ruben. "You're giving us your blessing for her to continue her work, but as my wife first," Doc Murphy nodded. "She loves healing, Ruben. It's part of who she is. Don't ask her to give it up entirely." "I wouldn't dream of it," Ruben assured him. "Her caring heart is one of the things I love most about her." "Then you'll make a fine match," the doctor said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Now go on, take your family home before it gets too dark to travel." Home. The word had never sounded sweeter to Ruben's ears. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, Sarah sleeping peacefully in Willow's arms as the wagon bumped along the familiar trail. Stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky, and a crescent moon provided just enough light to see the path ahead. "Are you cold?" Ruben asked, noticing Willow's slight shiver despite the blanket wrapped around her and Sarah. "A little," she admitted, "but happy cold if that makes sense." Ruben smiled, pulling her closer to his side. "We'll be home soon, fires laid in the hearth ready to light." "Home," Willow repeated softly. "I've never really had a true home of my own before. Always lived in other people's houses, first as a doctor's daughter, then as a nurse." "Well, it's your home now," Ruben said. "Yours to change as you see fit." "I wouldn't change much," Willow said thoughtfully. "Except perhaps curtains in the bedroom, and flowers when spring comes. A proper garden, not just herbs." "Whatever you want," Ruben promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. As they crested the final rise, the ranch came into view below, a dark silhouette against the night sky. But unlike the times Ruben had returned alone, seeing only emptiness and grief, tonight he saw possibility and promise. The future stretched before them, seasons of planting and harvest, Sarah's first steps and words, perhaps more children to fill the rooms with laughter. When they reached the cabin, Ruben lifted Sarah carefully from Willow's arms and carried her inside, placing her in the cradle that had once seemed like a symbol of his failure, but now represented new beginnings. Willow stood in the doorway, watching them with love shining in her eyes. "Welcome home," Ruben said, crossing the room to take her hands in his. "Home," Willow agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "At last." 5 years later, Ruben stood on the porch of the expanded ranch house, watching as Willow demonstrated to 5-year-old Sarah how to properly water the thriving garden that now surrounded their home. Their 3-year-old son, Daniel, sat nearby, solemnly placing stones in a row along the garden path. The sound of their laughter carried on the summer breeze, mingling with the distant lowing of cattle and the rhythmic creaking of the windmill. So much had changed since that desperate night when he'd stood beside a cradle, holding his crying baby with no idea how to comfort her. The modest ranch had prospered under his care, the herd nearly tripled in size. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and even a small examination room where Willow could tend to patients who came seeking her skilled care. Doc Murphy had retired the previous year, turning his practice over to the young doctor from Denver, while Willow continued her work as a midwife and healer. Her reputation had spread throughout the valley, and it wasn't uncommon for families to travel great distances to consult with Nurse Thorne about ailments that baffled other practitioners. But the greatest change was in Ruben himself. The grief that had once threatened to consume him had transformed into a quiet appreciation for the life he now led, and the memories of the woman who had given him Sarah. Margaret's portrait still hung in the parlor, and Sarah knew the story of her birth mother, how brave she had been, and how much she had wanted her daughter. As he watched his family, Ruben reflected on the strange turns life could take. Had Margaret not died, had he not sent that desperate message to Doc Murphy, had Willow not walked into his cabin that night and offered her help, none of this would exist. His greatest loss had ultimately led to his greatest blessings. Willow looked up, catching his eye from across the garden. She smiled, that same smile that had first brought light back into his darkened world. She whispered something to Sarah, who immediately ran toward the porch, her dark braids bouncing with each step. "Papa," she called, her face alight with excitement. Mama says to tell you we're having a new baby brother or sister after Christmas. Isn't that wonderful?" Ruben's heart swelled with joy as he lifted his daughter into his arms. "The most wonderful news," he agreed, looking over her head to Willow, who was approaching with Daniel on her hip, her free hand resting gently on the slight curve of her belly. "The most wonderful news in the world." As his family gathered around him on the porch of the home they had built together, Ruben Thorne knew with absolute certainty that he was the richest man in Montana territory. Not because of his cattle or his land, but because of the love that had begun on a desperate night beside a cradle with 4 simple words: "Let me help."